sharing. I guess my question is, I'm sorry, what's your name again, sir?
Dwight.
Dwight. So how did you feel, like, do you have children now?
I do.
Okay. So I'm asking the question because I currently teach urban education at Morgan State. And I love cities. I'm a product of public schools. But I feel, and I'm from Detroit, I feel very challenged by sending my child to Baltimore City Public School because I literally have like colleagues, friends, people who are church with me who are like, don't send your child to Baltimore City School. Again, if colleagues are saying it, it's just kind of difficult for someone who's from the area to be like, I wouldn't. I would tell people who, come to Detroit that there are schools you can send your kid to. I wouldn't send my kid to the majority of the schools, but there are schools you can. So long story short, my wife and I decided to send our son to an independent school right outside of Baltimore. And I feel so conflicted about it. But what was your experience like? Would you do it over again? Would you send your child, I guess, are they in public school now?
So she is 16 months. But my wife and I had a long conversation about this. We both are passionate about education. We chose to live in Prince George's County because of the demographics of the county. So I'm an attorney, I work at a big firm. A lot of my coworkers were confused, like, you're not in Virginia, you're not in Montgomery County? Like, because there's a stigma against PG County. And part of that conversation is that I cannot, knowing how passionate I am about education, not send my child to public school. My child has to go to public school. And my thinking was, what I noticed was the biggest difference was parental involvement. Parental education is one of the higher factors for a child's success. So it's not even so much about the school. People use school as a passive way of self-segregating. They blame it on the school system, but they're really just separating themselves from the others. If you have parents involved that have the resources to help with those fundraisers, which my attorney friends do, and that have the knowledge and the resources to come in and say, that doesn't seem right. And if that doesn't get together, I'm calling my judge friend. I'm calling my politician friend. That political influence, that social capital isn't applied to schools that we need it to, because the people that have it choose to separate themselves from the community. So I'm all on board, and I will be a helicopter parent until they get it together.
But just one small comment. The only thing is, that's Prince George's though. That is still, I understand that there is challenges in every place, but like Baltimore City and Prince George's are still very different avenues, I feel like. Would you send your child to an inner city school in the Bronx, in Baltimore City, in Detroit,
I think you have to. I mean, that part of it is biased. I'm from the hood. I'm not afraid of the hood, right? And I think that I have done well in adverse situations because of the way I was brought up. So for me, it's not all negative. There are a lot of virtues that I got from the way that I grew up, and I want my child to know what that's like. I want my child to have conflicts in school. I don't want them to be coddled their entire experience, and the first time they get a C on the paper, they're in tears. Like, I want them to know, having parents with 2 advanced degrees, one of the things I'm most concerned of, and I mean me and my wife, not my parents. I don't want my child to be entitled. I don't want my child to be arrogant. I don't want them to think they're better than people. So I want them to go to a school with real people and have their friends have real problems so that they don't look down on the taxi driver when they get in the car. I don't want them to ever be that way. And I think it's hard to have your child think that way if they only grow up around Silver Spoon kids. So I would send my kid to those schools. And if you're concerned, convince your friends to do it too. Like, for me, it's got to be a communal effort. We can't sit here and say the education system is broken, but I'm not going to help.
I actually don't have a question. I just came out to give mega kudos and praise for what you have done, because this is very much needed. I am an educator. I'm an assistant speech pathologist. I worked with Baltimore City Schools for 5 years. I worked in Harford County Schools, and I currently work for Shepherd Prep. And I've worked with every population of student you can name. Children with emotional disturbance, autism, typically developing. And I started to come up here, and you literally just took almost everything I was going to say out of my mouth. To me, education starts at home. It starts at home, and it should be broadened at home. It should be grown at home. When you have snow days, that doesn't mean this is the day you get to stay in bed and eat cereal, whatever. Like, why aren't we saying, okay, you know what, you would be at school right now, so how about we read this one chapter or this one book, and then you can have a snow day. You know, educators, literally, I think the principal said it earlier, our day doesn't start at 9 o'clock. I got off work at 4, I left the building at 6:15 today. I got there at 7:45 this morning. I don't gripe about it, I don't whine about it, because when I go into the classrooms, my student who's nonverbal is using their device and saying, I want cookies please, or signing to me, and that's my gratification. But at the same time, our system is so broken, and we do need the support to get the children, all the children, the white, the black, the rich, the poor, the resources that they need, or get those that have the resources to understand that there's a need greater than them. And I just really want to say kudos to the gentleman who was speaking about Baltimore City. I have 2 children. I raised them by myself. I had my oldest son when I was 19. He graduated from Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, which is like a pretty prestigious school here in Baltimore City. My youngest son, he graduated from Digital Harvard in 2016. Yeah. And so now my oldest who graduated from college is graduating from Morgan State on May 19, 2018. And he was expected to roll out in school design, graduate school, and they've offered him $40,000. Teaching assistantship and a fellowship, Baltimore City Schools. He went to Margaret Grant right up here, he went to Goldman's Elementary, and he went to, can't remember, Margaret Grant. And then the baby boy who has dyslexia, who came out of digital, is in Kansas right now in college. And he's waiting to get money to be transferring him because, you know, Digital Harvard's track team, if you don't know, is the thing. And it didn't take just the teachers, it was the coaches, it was the parents, it was the principals, it was the counselors at those schools. And that's why they are doing what they're doing. So don't wash them out yet, but just be a part of it.
Talk about what to do with schools, what to do with education, the hand-wringing, they're falling apart. One of the things that I researched and talked about, that Ashley helped me research and talk about, was Black independent schools. And the thing that I found most surprising about these schools, so we call them Panther schools, so the community school, the East Oakland Community School that Erica Huggins started, right? They took kids without parental involvement. They were often going upside the heads of the parents because the parents were not acting, but they were like, just don't stand in our way, right? I just need you to not put your hands on your child. Or like they were a little gangster when you hear them talk about it. I don't know that when the rest of us are going to actually act like this, but my point would be for them, for the Marva Collins School, for Ivy Leaf Academy, for Piney Woods, for these spaces where Black people took responsibility for educating kids. It wasn't rocket science what they were doing. And they educated kids who the public schools consistently said, we can't educate. Right? They can't be in classrooms with regular people. They got needs, they need drugs, they need, bad things are happening. Consistently, Marva Collins would say, give me the worst, give me the ones who smell the worst, is what she would say. Because she would say that's a proxy for her, for a kind of dysfunction in the home and lack of parental involvement. And she was like, but I can bring out the best in them. The thing that looking at, and all of these schools, there were 450 of them between 68 and 72, of all of these schools, success for them was graduation from college, not high school graduation, not, you know, getting a little couple of grade levels on a reading test, not, right? When you had changed, what they would all say is because we are changing the life of the next generation. If we take you, who's got no college graduates in your family, and we get you through college, the chances are that yours are going to start life somewhere very different and have a different kind of fighting chance, right? Like that's why they said college graduation. Here's the thing. They were successful for a really long time, and I can guarantee you nobody is sitting in schools of education teaching their methods telling you how they did what they did. What they did is not part of educational discussion. You wouldn't know that it existed, right? And so we talk about wanting to reform the lives and communities, and I'm saying there's a roadmap. Like, you don't have to reinvent it. People did it and did it well. Hundreds of schools. The Piney Woods is still doing it well. Like, Piney Woods is still taking whoever and educating them to the highest levels. And so my plea is always with educators, like, if those are the outcomes that interest you, if the outcomes that those kinds of schools were able to enact, with the same kinds of kids that schools are still saying we cannot educate them, then please just look at what the people did. It's a roadmap. You don't have to make it up. It's possible. It really is possible.
Hello, I just want to thank you both for being here. And I want to say that in Baltimore, we've had over 70 public schools permanently closed since 2000. We've had the black teacher workforce go from 63% in 2005 to 38% in 2015 or 14. And so we have, like, you know, this permanent closure of black schools, mass reduction of black teachers. And so in light of your term, Segronomics, I'm wondering, what are your thoughts around the way the system of the Baltimore City Public Schools is operating?
Yeah, so the thing, all over the country, what you're seeing is a decrease in, you're seeing like a decrease in teachers, period, right? Like, teachers are fleeing, and now that y'all gotta be armed, apparently. Like, apparently, part if you're gonna be in the classroom, you're gonna have to be certified in weapons control or something. But you're seeing a big decrease, but the decrease around black teachers in particular, and most of the data really will tell you, you don't have to have black teachers, but pretty consistently, black teachers get better outcomes. Certain kinds of black teachers, not all the black teachers. Not all black people got all that much knowledge of black people, right? Like, you can get lots of black people who never grew up around any black people either, right? The ones that actually care about like black folks do really, really well. But the reduction really has to do with an assault on the union and on teachers' unions. And black folks fought hard in the 40s and 50s to even get in unions. If they were not welcomed with open arms, but if they wanted to have the job security, if they didn't want to be fired first, if they didn't want to be subject to different kinds of racial and sexual harassment, they understood that union protection was going to get them there. And union households for black folks in the U.S. Go hand in hand with the rise of the middle class. Affirmative action policies and unionization track with when you start to get a black middle class. The reduction has everything to do with folks like Dems for Ed Reform and other entities, like I was talking about education, right, who have made it their job to bust the union. Like, y'all know this story, right? Like, Dems for Ed Reform, let me tell you real quick. So for this in particular, there are a bunch of folks who all came out of TFA together. Really, literally, they did. I'm not demonizing TFA. They all started TFA together in the first few years with Wendy Cobb. So Whitney Tilson is one of these folks. He went on and founded this big, huge hedge fund. And he was working with Richard Barth and Dave Levin and Mike. Richard Barth is Wendy Cobb's husband. Yeah. But he's also the CEO of the KIPP schools now. He worked for Edison Schools for a while. He's the CEO of KIPP schools. So all of these folks, right? They were all real tight. Like the folks who are most impacting the education of poor folks and black folks and Latino folks in this country all started together. Really, truly, no lie. So Dave Levin starts complaining to Whitney Tilson that we want more charter schools. We need more. We look at what we're doing, and they're going and touring the schools, and they're like, the kids are so cute when they're marching around, and they're like really that thing. What's that slant thing where you have to like raise your hand, sit up, and do the right? Like they like that. So the hedge funders are coming and touring the charter schools, and these behaviors that they're teaching the kids. They're like, we need more of these schools. That started to be a proxy for good education all of a sudden. They live in those, we can't open any more schools because unions are standing in the way, and unions are such a big supporter of the Democratic Party that even though we are Democrats, we can't get any traction for these things, that we want more of the charter schools because unions keep saying no. So Whitney Tilson says, this is in an interview that he gave, so I'm not making this up, like these are his own words here. So Whitney Tilson is sort of like, well, then that's a political problem. And the way that you deal with politics in the US has to do with money. We can solve that problem. And so they founded Dems for Ed Reform, Democrats for Education Reform, not to provide different kinds of education to folks. Literally, they founded it to break the power of the teachers' union and the hold that the teachers' union had on the Democratic Party, according to the founders, right? They said they got their first 2 big wins with their new organization when they identified Cory Booker in his first run for mayor of Newark. And they started to fund him. They funded him for his second run, where he won, and Barack Obama in his losing effort at the Senate. And what they said is, once Cory won, and then Barack became president, the field was wide open, and what they required of Barack Obama, according to Whitney Tilson, was to hire Arne Duncan, right, as the Secretary of Education. That was the price that they said they extracted. Because they knew that Arne Duncan, they said, would be open to breaking the power of teachers' union. So that's the kind of organizing and money that we're looking at when we talk about something like a reduction in black teachers, with the reduction of union efficacy and the literal obliteration of the unions. What comes along with that, if it's intended or not, is you just have fewer black teachers.
Hi, thank you for being here. I'm a professor of education here, and I proudly send my kids to Baltimore City schools. I have a question. I'm intrigued by this idea of democracy tracking along with education that you mentioned, and I'm formulating this question as I think it out. So be patient, but. This idea of the black independent schools is also true here. There are black independent schools that are that do great things here, and some folks have proposed that in order to do better by our black students, we need to make more of those schools. And in fact, what would be good in order to spur that on would be to get vouchers for folk to have tuition dollars to, have more of those schools. So it creates these strange bedfellows between people who want to see civil rights and who also want to see privatization. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Sure. Are you about to ask the question? I was going to get you to ask the question too, and then we can answer both of them since there's only time for 2. So you ask yours, and then we'll get to both.
Quick. I really appreciate your you talking about students with disabilities, which, if you're not sure, students with disabilities is a side note, is a term that you can use if you're not sure, especially because these are disability rights issues, as someone who's very engaged in disability rights. However, I will be the first to admit that our movement is often very white and very single issue, so I'd love to hear more about how, our movement can kind of engage better with racial justice.
All right, I'm gonna start with vouchers, and then you wanna do Sure. And you can do both then. So what I want to say about vouchers, can y'all hear me? Do I need to talk in this speaker? Through the mic. Okay, fine. I usually, I think that I project well, and people keep saying no, you need a mic. So here's the thing about vouchers, and about charter school and a lot of these ed reform movements. If you go to black parents and say, I have a way to educate your child, I have a way to break this cycle of undereducation that you are being plagued with. Throughout history, from post-Reconstruction on, they will move heaven and earth and run over anybody in their path for the hope to potentially. You don't even have to necessarily prove that what you're offering is effective or will work. All you have to do is say, what you got now is not working. And so for vouchers and for schools, the two things I will say very quickly, because I know that we're running out of time. Vouchers got started, this woman named Colin Williams in Milwaukee is the first large-scale experiment in vouchers, and it was literally got started because she was black from Alabama, long-term resident of Milwaukee, which has horrible schools, have always had horrible schools, or have had horrible schools since the 70s, let's put it like that. And she said, there are some independent schools that are doing great things. This will be a way to fund them. Let's do vouchers so that we can fund the work of the schools that we know are doing well. What happened that time and every other time that anyone has ever tried vouchers is it's white parents and wealthy parents who end up sending their kids to religious schools. And somehow it's never possible for the black parents who are supposed to be the focus to get any of those resources. And in fact, what put most of the black independent schools out of business was the fact that they couldn't get charters, right? And as charter schools started coming into these same communities, even though they were performing at crazy high levels, they were consistently denied charters. And the folks who were approved for charters had these experimental techniques where you're doing the slant thing. Like they were sort of like, yes, that, we're gonna come in and do that. But parents went rushing to the charters because they couldn't afford to keep paying for the black independent schools, which were modest, but still it was money that poor people didn't have. And so that's what put them out of business. And every instance for the other thing with the vouchers, that they're tried in any large-scale way, it doesn't help the people it's supposed to help, because people who are organized, who have access to power, will always find a way to hoard educational resources for their kids. The people who do not have access to power do not often find a way to even access, much less hoard, resources for their kids.
Do you want to talk about?
Sure. So I'm sort of torn when it comes to vouchers and other mechanisms to pull kids out of public school, because I benefited from being pulled out of a public school. But I think the issue with those sort of programs and charter schools in general is that it doesn't fix the system for the larger population. I think oftentimes what I've seen with charter schools, even the successful ones, they have strategies that cannot be replicated. One strategy would be filtering out their kids. You know, there's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you have a lottery system, certain types of families will even seek out that opportunity. So you're already filtering some of your kids. And then having a zero tolerance rule that public schools don't have the luxury of, you're filtering your kids even more. So now you tout these test scores and these causal emission that is a bit deceiving, and it doesn't help the community at large. And then for me, with regards to disabilities and how it's used and addressed in schools, I've had a stuttering problem my entire life. I still have it some. I've figured out ways around it. I've had family members with disabilities. One of my best friends had bipolar disorder, was untreated until he got to college. And I think what often happens is that when black kids, especially, or kids of color, have disabilities, they're ignored. Because if you have ADHD or something else, you're just a kid that's bad, right? And if you come from a more privileged background and you have that, there is a team of people that's gonna help you figure it out. You know, so it's an important issue for teachers in low-income communities to figure out how do we make sure that we are actively taking care of our kids with an array of disorders that they have to deal with.